Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly show that airs at 8:30 a.m. each Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. Don't live near Santa Fe? You can stream the show live from ksfr.org anywhere with internet access. I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy. Today, I'll be speaking with two very engaged Albuquerque activists, Rayellen Smith and Tiffany Stevens, both of whom play leadership roles in Albuquerque Indivisible and the Democratic Party. We're going to discuss their views on why and how they advocate in those organizations. With every legislative district up for re-election, I'm expecting we may discuss their views on Dems in Albuquerque who may have earned a primary challenge, and certainly some GOP legislators like Senator Greg Schmeeds in District 19. In any case, we will not be lacking for discussion topics. We'll get to Rayellen and Tiff in just a second, but first a few short announcements. Last week, I interviewed Land Commissioner Stephanie Garcia Richard. We discussed her role as the Land Commissioner, the legislature's finally authorizing the creation of a renewable energy office within the Land Commission, and what more may be possible with this office in place. We'll also discuss the extraordinary amount of renewable energy being developed on state land under her watch, and other ways the Land Commission can constrain, contain extraction on state land and or promote renewable energy development. It was a very interesting show. I want to remind you that if you're listening to this show while driving around town and miss any of today's show, you can watch the full YouTube recording of this show and any prior show by going to retakeourdemocracy.org and clicking on the Retake on the Radio button on the right side of the home page. You'll find recordings of all our previous shows there listed in chronological order. So if you go to check out this show, maybe scroll around after you watch this show, today's show, and I think you'll find some other interesting interviews there. As we announced in our last blog, Retake is taking a 6-month hiatus. So Roxanne and I have time and energy to address some long overlooked personal aspirations and to restore balance in our lives. The Retake work is full-time unpaid job, something that is simply not sustainable over the long haul. We've been doing this since the fall of 2015, and we aren't getting any younger. So it's time to figure out a sustainability plan, or what they call a succession plan in the corporate sectors. And we don't have one. And we really feel that there's a good place that Retake plays in the advocacy arena, and that we just simply can't perform it forever. And so we're going to take the hiatus to also examine ways in which we could probably structure our 501c3, which we have not developed at all after getting our approval from the IRS. You can't fly the Retake plane and build the Rethink plane at the same time. We have figured that out. So we're taking a break, but we're not taking a break from this. So you can find out progress on how we're doing by just listening to this show, because I'll try and update people periodically in the show. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we are conducting this show on stolen Tewa land, and I want to thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of the land. We need to learn from them, and we need to learn soon. We don't appear to be learning very soon or very quickly, but we'll try and do that. So let's get started. Welcome, Rayellen and Tiffany. Glad to have you.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Sure. So I always like to let our guests introduce themselves. So how about if you take a couple of minutes to each of you to tell us who you are and why and how you have become involved in progressive advocacy at local and state levels. Rayellen, you first, and then Tiffany.
Well, thanks, Paul. I'm the president of Indivisible Albuquerque, which was born in early 2017 from the Trump election. I'm proud to have been elected president. I think it's 3-4 times.
Oh, wow.
All the times that I run. I got active in progressive politics after Trump's election when I went to the Washington, D.C. Women's March. That, as you might remember, that was one day after he was inaugurated, and I guarantee you the crowd was bigger that day than it was his day. I was very inspired by that and motivated to make change in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and at the national level. And I have a great background in some organizational skills, so I've just been busy putting them to work ever since. Over to you, Tiff.
So yes, thank you, Paul, for having us. My name is Tiffany Stevens. I am the current Secretary of Indivisible Albuquerque. I am on my second term of this position. I became active in local and state politics, similar to Rayellen. I felt a need of duty and felt that I had lacked my ethic duty to the common good of our citizens by not being active before the Trump election. And so I realized I really had to get in gear if I was going to have a movement of change within our party and within our state and local politics. And so I too became very active in my local Democratic Party and wanted to find my nearest Indivisible chapter. I found Indivisible back in 2016 in their early stages and have been there ever since, and now play an active role in leadership within Indivisible.
Hey, similar to us. We came a little bit before Trump. It was when Bernie announced, and we went, "Oh my God, somebody we can believe in." And so we
Absolutely.
were coordinators for Northern New Mexico for his campaign. And then when even before Trump was elected, we kind of assumed Hillary would win, but we thought she was going to need some pushes here and there. And we also felt like it's been our experience that you get nowhere trying to lobby in Washington from New Mexico, but you can actually influence people here in New Mexico, and you get to know legislators and other leaders. And so it felt like you had a better opportunity to create change. So it sounds like that's pretty much what you experienced. And when Trump certainly didn't hurt. After he won, we announced a town hall in Santa Fe, and we're hoping to get 100 people there because it was snowing, and we had 400 people in a building that holds 200. There were people in the parking lot. We had speakers set up in the parking lot, and they were standing up outside there. And that had zero to do with us. It had everything to do with the panic that everybody felt at that moment. Yep. And we have somehow survived. So let's move on to a cheerier topic. There are many ways in which someone can express their progressive values. Why do each of you devote a portion of your advocacy to working in leadership roles in the Democratic Party of New Mexico? Tiffany, then Rayellen.
So, and thank you for bringing up our friend Bernie. I saw Bernie in the primary in 2015 here in Albuquerque, and it was an amazing turnout. And after the primary, there was two goals that were approached to me by a man that I admire, Tom Hartman. And the first goal was get inside your local Democratic Party. And then after Trump's election, get inside your local Indivisible chapter. And so I went for those two goals as strong as possible after that moment of hearing my to-do list. And so that's what got me involved. If I wanted to have a progressive voice in leaders that I wanted to see make it past the primary, then I needed to be a leader within the party. I couldn't just be a voter. I had to be a part of that change in electing leaders that also aligned with my progressive values and values that I thought we needed to move forward within our state.
Okay, Rayellen?
And for me, it's very similar. It's we've been encouraging Indivisible members to become active in the Democratic Party because we want to show that progressive voice in the party. So we've been asking members to run for ward chairs, and we have quite a few ward chairs, like 12, 13, something like that, and to run for state central committee and county central committee. But for me, it's really about making sure we have that solid progressive voice in the state party. I picked the easiest job in the world in the state party for me because, I'm a retired CPA, and as treasurer, it's just kind of like second nature. It's all clicking easy. But the more people that we can get involved at the party from Indivisible, we know their progressive values. We know that we'll be able to keep the progressive train moving and elect more progressive candidates, which is what we all want to achieve.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but before we do, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about I've often felt that Dems nationally and in New Mexico, and I'm saying this because you're the treasurer of the party, so I'm assuming you have some knowledge of this. Um, I've often felt that the Dems nationally and in New Mexico focus far too much on fundraising appeals and not enough on voter education. Based on a result of being on the SCC, because I'm on the SCC, and I'm sure you get this too, I get email solicitations from Dems across the state and the nation many times a day. Have you seen evidence that this is effective, or do you think it can be counterproductive and turn voters off? Teresa Leger is a great House rep and a friend of ours, but it gets old hearing from her 3 times a day with, a paragraph of content and then the buttons. Would you like to donate 50, 100, 200, and would you like to make it monthly? Do you feel that that's an effective strategy?
No, it's
Even if
not.
we
I
hate
hate
it.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hate it. I hate it. I think all of us hate it. I think we would be much better served if at the state party level, we were able to focus more on issues and less on candidates. I mean, but we're focused on getting candidates elected. So we've got to focus on both, but we don't pay enough attention to focus on issues. That's something we have in our plan, something we want to do, but we haven't been very effective at it. Unfortunately, this funding system that we have we're stuck with it ever since corporations became people, Citizens United, the money need to run, even a basic campaign for city council just keeps exponentially growing. We need some new laws around that, so we can have people, not money, running elections. I used to live in the UK, and the candidates there get to spend very little money on their campaigns, no big donors, very few TV ads, no dark money. They have like literally a month to run. They can't do anything campaign before a month. It was so great. I would just love to see one state or another start with some laws like that. Maybe we could push it through, but I hate it as much as you, and I think we're stuck with it until we can. I don't know until when. We're stuck.
And I think that that's one of the other things about the UK that I just love. It's 1 month, and there's no. It's like then you get people can focus on it, pay attention to it. I imagine that the news back there, the BBC, focuses on the candidates during that time frame. They're not going to do that for months, and so all we get are those snippets of Trump saying this and so saying that. And it's in no way an educational process. So this is a follow-up to you about the money in politics. Does the Democratic Party take funds from gas, oil, and utility industries, or do those industries just target their resource more strategically, supporting key legislators and decision makers more directly? And how can we reduce the influence of industry in the political process?
At the state party, there's very little, if any, money coming from any of those industries. Those industries target their spending at candidates like you just mentioned. We get most of our money from labor, from individuals, a few small businesses. We also get money from the Democratic National Committee, and I can't tell you whether their funds have funds from those industries or not.
I'm guessing
but
they
I know,
do.
I'm guessing they do too. But as far as our state party, there might be a little bit in there, but that they know we're not going to focus on them, so they're going to spend their money. I'm sure the Republican Party of New Mexico gets some funding, but we don't have hardly any, if any.
So let's shift gears a little bit and return back to what we were talking about just for a second in terms of ward chairs and things like that and getting into the party. I'm interested, Tiffany, you serve as a precinct chair. Tell us what goes on year round at the precinct level. And then as a follow-up, I'm curious if you're aware of any party efforts to do education issue focused canvassing, contacting all voters, not just Dems.
So yes, I have served as precinct chair. And, a lot of the work that goes on year round as precinct chair is identifying the voters within your precinct and getting to know who they are and talking to them. The work really does kick in when we get closer to primary season, when you start advocating for candidates and encouraging voters to turn out for the polls. And a lot of the work is done at the ward level. I will say our Bernalillo County Chair, Flor Lasso, did trainings on minivan and tried to educate the local precincts and ward chairs on how to use those apps and how to help their other precinct chairs and voters in their precinct how to access that app and use it to benefit themselves and collect data, so that we have a better system on seeing where people's issues are and who they're leaning towards as far as candidates. Now, I will say, as I've worked within a candidate's campaign before, Claudia Reisner, I did a lot of these trainings for volunteers, and I loved it. I love talking to people about how to talk to voters at the doors, how to talk to voters about what issues are important to them and what drives them to actually vote for someone, and what issues they would like to see voted upon. And so I do think we need to really listen to our volunteers, because they're the ones putting the work out. And sometimes I feel that as a party, we're not lenient enough to what our volunteers are saying they need. If they need paper and pen to do the work, I think they should have paper and pen. If they're comfortable with apps, use the app. And so I think as a party, sometimes we need to be more flexible and meet people's needs where they're at, because the core of the work comes from the volunteers, and we really need to have and appreciate those volunteers.
I'll just
Okay.
pick up on the second part of your question there about the community conversations, canvassing. At Indivisible, we have a program called Deep Canvassing,
Okay,
which
that's
is
the same
issue
thing.
based. Yeah, it's the same thing. It's very issue based, not candidate based, and a bunch of Indivisibles did a lot of deep canvassing last summer and early fall on the west side, canvassing for Gabe last year. So
Okay.
I think that's a really effective method.
So just for our listeners to fill them in, the question was about what a strategy for canvassing that's called community conversations. And Retake took a stab at that 3 or 4 years ago, and we had it all set up, but no one wanted to do it. And I think there was something wrong with the way we, promoted it, because it makes so much sense. The idea is that you go and you talk to voters, and you're not even going to voters, you're going to residents. You're not targeting registered voters, you're not targeting Democrats, you're targeting people. And the idea is that you're basically, hopefully, you're talking to neighbors. That's why it would work real well at a precinct level. And the idea was just to listen mostly. What are the things that keep you up at night? And from this, you start a conversation, and you start to understand what those people care about. And then you can come back and talk to them the second and third and fourth time about more information about the things they care about. And then they see you as you build a relationship. And then when you come back like 6 months later to talk about a candidate, you can say, remember we had this conversation about, affordable housing. Well, you might be interested in this candidate, and this is why. And so then it's more substantive. The thing I hate about canvas, I like canvassing, but the part I don't like is the way it just targets voters, and you're just trying to find out if they've voted yet, if they're planning to vote, if they have a plan to vote. And that's basically it. It's not really trying to converse with them in any kind of substantive way. So that's just my spiel. So as a follow-up to this, because this is another thing I think and this is one of the reasons I got involved in the SCC in the first place, and then I just haven't had the time to really push it. But are either of you aware of the Democratic Party organizing at precinct or ward levels to conduct local community service projects? And I kind of felt like if the people in the community saw the Democratic Party as something other than, can you donate to us, but something that they come in and they clean up a ditch, or they do something at a school, they collect food for a homeless shelter or whatever. Are you aware of the Democratic Party doing any work like that?
I know that's certainly something we had aimed to do last year. We had hoped to be partnering with Habitat for Humanity. We did a couple small things, but they didn't turn out to be big things. I think that's just something we need to grow into. I know in various counties around the state, as I visited them, almost all of them have some community project. I know even in Roosevelt County in Portales, they had a where there's not a whole lot of Democrats at all. They had a big event to paint one of the buildings downtown. And, they got a whole bunch of people there. The newspaper was there. Everybody was there. They made a big party. Lots of people that weren't Democrats became, registered, and they had a big public fun event. I know that happens across the state in various counties.
All right. Well, we're going to need to take a short break here because I got to remind our listeners that got to pay the bills here, that KSFR is more important than ever with so much misinformation in the mainstream and social media and even in the most political rhetoric, no matter what the party. In the face of that misinformation, there's KSFR that offers timely news and alerts and a wide range of programming to keep you informed and sane in these ever so challenging times. In an era replete with misinformation, at KSFR, you get the straight scoop, fact-based news from Amy Goodman on Democracy Now!, The View from Europe with the BBC, and KSFR's own state and local news. Plus, they have an array of great music curated by disc jockeys with personalities who actually hand select long sequences of music, often with specific themes discussed throughout the hour. It's music with personality, not just a computer-generated series of songs. Great stuff. For me, the most important thing about KSFR are the many contributions, of all their contributions, are the informative discussions on timely issues, from Economic Update with renowned Marxist Richard Wolff, Retake Our Democracy, and a host of other moderated hour-long discussions. Where else can you get an hour of socialist radio every Saturday morning from 8 to 9 a.m.? Only KSFR. You may not always agree with the views shared on Retake Our Democracy or Economic Update, but you will always be challenged, and that is an important part of public radio. So, just 3 weeks ago, we had Pledge Week at KSFR, and we've fallen a bit short of our goals. So, if you want to keep this kind of programming going, please, after you listen to this show, consider going to ksfr.org, click on the donate button and toss them 10, 20, or 50 bucks, and think of it as your ticket for admission to a wealth of really great programming. And on behalf of KSFR, I want to thank you for your generosity. Let's get back to our discussion with Rayellen and Tiffany Stevens. Tiffany, and we've only got about 5 more minutes of the show, and so we'll go over for when we run out of time on the show, we keep recording, but it's not heard on KSFR. It's available on YouTube, and so that's what we'll do. But Tiffany, we've been speaking about the Democratic Party, and you are the Albuquerque Indivisible lead. Oops. We're going to skip that question because it didn't quite happen. Live radio doesn't always work well. Anyway, I met with the governor in the summer before her first election and left impressed. But politicians at that level are so adept at telling you what you want to hear without really committing to anything specific. Has this been your experience with the governor and other Democratic leaders? Either of you?
So I would say yes, we did have meetings with Governor Lujan Grisham's staff monthly for about a year before COVID. And so during that time, those meetings were absolutely productive on listening about policies that we would like see advanced or slowed down or that we supported. And her staff was very receptive and opening to listening to our ideas. Since COVID, I have found it very, very hard to talk with the governor or get back into her office to resume those meetings. As far as specific policies and legislation that she supports that are aligned with some of the values that I see that we need to move forward, I find that we're lacking on some of those mutual decision-making legislations that I feel that need to happen. Do I feel that there's moments where politicians are speaking to the crowd? Absolutely. And that happens probably to all politicians, depending, they need to speak usually to their donors. And second, I hope they're speaking and listening to their voters. And, I'm going to pass this off to Rayellen. Give me your perspective.
I think I'm in total alignment. Yeah, they are very adept at telling us what we want to hear. And that's why one of our main goals at Indivisible is to actually follow through and follow up on their voting records, listen to the comments they make in hearings, and then call them up immediately after and talk to them about what we agree or disagree on, and thank them, but also hold them accountable to let them know we're watching. I think that's a really important thing to do. Otherwise, we're never going to get anything but fluffy talking points.
So we'll give you about a minute to answer this. Do you have a better success in having dialogue with state legislators on their votes and things like that?
Absolutely better success than talking with the governor's office, without a doubt. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll talk more about that when we after we close the show. So listeners on KSFR, you're going to want to go to Retake on Radio at retakeourdemocracy.org. That's our homepage. And on the right side of the page is Retake on the Radio. You click on that and all the shows are there. But I wanted to give, before we sign off on the radio, I wanted to give both of you one of you an opportunity to tell our listeners how to find out more about Indivisible Albuquerque.
I will happily take that. And Tiff, if I forget anything, please just pitch
Absolutely.
in. So we have a website. It's at indivisible-albuquerque.com. On the website, it'll tell you what our hot button issues are, what we're working on at the moment. You can go to the speakers tab. We meet every single week, and we've been meeting every week since 2017. We meet at Monday nights from 5:30 to 7 at O'Neill's on Central in Washington. We always have, I think that's one of our strengths, is our fabulous list of speakers. We hear from, we always have 2 slots of speakers. One is like a candidate slot, and the second is a proper speaker who will be there to educate all of us about issues. So all of that information is available on the website. The meetings are open to the public. So please come when you're in Albuquerque and visit us. Say hello. Make sure you stop by at the front and say hi.
And I will say, if you can't join us in person at O'Neill's, you're always welcome to join us by Zoom. We live stream all of our meetings. We'll usually get there about 5:15 and live stream all the way till 7. And we love to have questions and hear responses from our Zoom attendees. So join us Monday at 5:30 to 7 anytime.
And the Zoom link is also on the website on the speaker page.
And I just wanted to say that I've spoken there 2 or 3 times, and I'm just blown away by the fact that you can do a weekly show, a weekly thing, and get the crowd that you get. So I'd encourage our Albuquerque folks to check this out. And that's all the time we have for our show today. And I wanted to remind, next week, I think I'm going to be having Tom Solomon and Senator Ortiz-Pino on to talk about geothermal and the potential for geothermal as a transition to help us in our economic transition in the state of New Mexico. So tune us in then. And until then, take care of yourselves, but stay active. It's the only way we fix this mess. And thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back next week. Bye-bye. Okay, we had to leave a 5-second gap there so that the radio station engineers could go, okay, that's where the radio show ended. And we did that perfectly. I don't often do it perfectly, but that was 28 minutes and 50 seconds. That's exactly what they want. So anyway, I was going to ask you, Rayellen, to tell us a little bit about your role as party treasurer. What does that work involve? You kind of diminished the work there a little bit.
Well, it's fun for me. I get to work with our compliance team and our finance team on a daily basis to raise money, report money, and also spend money. I do call time to raise money for the party. I review and approve voluminous reports to the Secretary of State and the Federal Election Commission, because we have to report every penny we raise and every penny we spend, exactly where we spend it. We have to monitor that we're all within the campaign limits. If one person donates too much, we have to give the money back. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on with the thousands of transactions that we process every month. Last year on the Budget and Finance Committee, we finally got written policies and procedures written and documented to help keep our funds safe and well managed and available for spending. I focus on preparing cash flow analysis, financial reports, estimating future expenses, doing our budgeting, all of that fun treasury stuff. Probably the best money the state party spends, besides our salaries for our staff, is what we pay our external compliance team to do all of our bookkeeping and preparing all of these reports. It is, you would not believe the stuff you have to report. It's usually like 100-page document every month that we have to file with the Federal Election Commission, and I have to sign off on all of those. And being an ex-auditor, I audit them. I don't just sign. Like I make sure I understand where all the transactions hit, if they hit right, and they're recorded properly in the bank account. So I spend
I
a
would
lot of
not
time
be a
on
good candidate for that job.
that.
After 30, I was the boss of my consulting firm in the Bay Area for 30 years. And I had a executive administrator, I think that was her title. And she'd come in and hand me contracts that were like an inch thick. And I just signed the last page and give it back to her. And she goes, "Aren't you even going to look at it?" And I go, "No." And
no, I look at it all. I look at it all, and I sign all those, and I review them, and I question, and I push back. And yeah, there. I think that even the state party leader, guy that leads all the state parties, his name is Ken Martin. He's even told me he's not ever seen a treasurer as involved as I am, which means I'm overworking, or I don't know. I don't know what else it means, but
And I will say, I think this is why it's so important that we have leaders within the Democratic Party that aren't just progressive, but that are competent and are passionate about what they're doing, because the leaders within the party are going to lead the movement within the progressive change that's going to happen. And that's how we make that change happen. It is having people like Rayellen in leadership that knows the job that's ahead of her, and then not only can do that, but can continue to lead us forward. So I'm just so thrilled that you're leading our party along with our other leaders.
Thank you.
okay, I got another question about money. So this is for
Okay.
the New Mexico Dems are clearly going to be targeted by nationally, and I imagine even in the legislature, but certainly Gabe. So can you tell us how well equipped financially the party is right now to be able to carry on campaigns next year?
Well, the good news is there's, as usual in a big election year, there'll be two pots of money. There's our operating money that we raise that funds the party, the salaries of the permanent staff and things like that, the rent and all that good stuff. And then we also have the coordinated campaign, and that's where the candidates themselves contribute money to the party into this separate bank account called the coordinated bank account. And that money then gets spent on the candidates in the races. So the great news is both of those operating funds and the coordinated funds are very well funded. This year in the operating fund, we have about $500,000 in the bank, which has never happened in an off-year cycle. Usually it happens during an election year, but not an off-year cycle. The coordinated campaign will kick off very shortly, and all of the candidates have been given what's called table stakes on what they need to contribute so that we can get all of them elected. Basically, that's who decides how much goes to whom. Well, that's basically decided. We call it a round table, but it's the campaign managers and Jessica and Sean get together with them on a weekly basis and figure out what the next big thing is, what's going on strategically, where the money needs to go, that kind of thing. I don't know for sure because none of this has come to happen yet, but I know that the DNC believes that Melanie's race in CD1 is pretty solid. So my guess would be that, you know, she might get fewer dollars out of the coordinated campaign. She'll be asked to contribute fewer dollars, but Gabe's campaign is going to be the one that will get a much bigger focus because he only won by a little over 1,300 votes, as I recall, and that was the slimmest margin of any House race in the country. So I feel pretty certain that we're going to want to spend a little bit of extra money there to make sure that we pull Gabe through the next one. Did
Of all
that
the
answer?
candidates that I met during the last session, Gabe and our new Attorney General were the two that I just felt the most positive about. Aside from
Absolutely.
whatever position they might speak about, they just seemed like genuine human beings who cared and wanted to get stuff
Agreed.
done. Really good stuff.
Agreed.
So my follow-up question was going to be how you make decisions about who to get money from, and you answered that, so we'll just move on. And this is hearkening back to the last legislative session, which I found incredibly frustrating, especially given that virtually no climate-related legislation passed in 2021. What did pass, you know, the tax credits and so forth, and the geothermal study got vetoed. So what needs to happen to get meaningful legislation on climate through the legislature and to the governor? Mimi Stewart stated last month that to ever achieve meaningful climate legislation, some moderate and conservative Dems will have to be primaried and replaced with more progressive legislators. Do you agree with that analysis? I was stunned to hear her say that.
I don't know, Tiff, you want to go first?
Honestly, I'm proud that she said that. I didn't expect those words to come from Senator Stewart. She is my senator, and we've had conversations with her, but that just shows the importance of primarying these Democrats, and it absolutely needs to happen. There's really just no excuse for you to be a Democrat. In fact, I even think this applies to Republicans. Climate change is coming for all of us. It is the existential threat that is coming for our children and their future. And I feel that this change in legislation needs to happen now. And so I'm ready to primary some dinos.
Yeah, I think I'm in complete agreement. We're certainly thinking about that and looking at some particular Dems here in Albuquerque that really let us down, really let us down. So we're going to be spending some time on that and looking into that. I think the new existential threat is going to be artificial intelligence, but there's not enough time on the Zoom today to talk about that.
So I have a question for you because about 3 years ago, I met with Brian Egolf and Peter Wirth, you know, leadership of the Democratic Party. And I said, Retake is working with others and we're going to go after some Dems, some dinos. And they were not amused. Within the party, it's like, you know, no matter how conservative the Democrat, if they vote against abortion protections, if they but they'll vote for some budget item that they want, they need that person. And so we said we were going after John Arthur Smith, George Munoz, Patty Lundstrom, and we gave a list of others. And they listened and they were appalled that we were thinking about going after Patty Lundstrom. And so I'm wondering that this is a lead into how you balance your Indivisible hat with your party leadership hat. I mean, is there pressure on you to like clam up a little bit or not take on Dems in primary?
I can tell you, being on the executive committee, I get myself wound up into some pretty
twisted
pretzels about this very thing. But what I always make sure I do is that, you know, Sean and Jessica always know which pretzel I'm twisted in, what my name is going to be on, if my name's going to be in the paper, if my name's going to be on a lawsuit. I always make sure they're notified. They have never told me to back down, back off, or do anything. Neither has any legislator, neither has the governor. Nobody has told me to not do what I'm doing. And as soon as they do, you know, if they do tell me, I am more than happy to resign, because this is much more important than the Democratic Party. I mean, this, you know, this work, making sure that our state has policies and legislation that's fair to every single person in the state, protecting us. That's the stuff that I'm going to wake up and fight for every day. And you know, I'm very fortunate. I feel very supported at this time. And I'll push it as far as I can.
That's great.
And to what Rayellen, I want to add a little bit, and those policies, the way that we pass those policies is by getting those Democrats elected that are going to support those policies. So if it means primarying a Democrat that is not supporting a piece of legislation that is needed, then that's what needs to happen first, because the most important thing is making sure that we're electing officials that are ready for the job to vote for legislation, whether it be climate change, you know, a livable wage for all New Mexicans, healthcare. Those things are only going to get passed by having the candidate there to either introduce the legislation or to vote on it.
That's right.
Oh, it's interesting. I had dinner last night with Jay Levine and some other Renewable House folks, and I've talked to him a bunch about the fact that you've got maybe the most progressive state platform in the country, and you probably do. I would guess it's even more progressive than California or Massachusetts, and yet you continually find Democrats who don't vote the platform, you know, just what Tiffany was talking about. And one time, was it Marjorie Banwell was here, former chair of the Democratic Party, and we asked her, she came to Santa Fe to speak, and we asked her, why is it that that Democratic candidates aren't held accountable for not supporting the platform? And basically she said, well, the platform, it's there, but they can pick and choose what they want to support. And I'm going, well, that's not really what a platform is supposed to be. A platform is supposed to say, this is what we stand for. So if this is what you stand for, then you ought to expect that when it comes down to voting, you're going to vote for those things. And it doesn't happen. And so I'm wondering, are there discussions in the Democratic Party or among Indivisible about let's hold this platform up to the candidates and say, come on?
I can tell you that at almost every Indivisible meeting, when we have a candidate slot, somebody will ask the question, give us your views on the state party platform, what you support, what you don't support. They almost always say, yes, I support it. And that's where the fun comes. But yeah, we ask at Indivisible. At the state party, that's a little trickier. That's a little trickier because of the dynamics of you know, the party supporting candidates to get elected, and trying to take, you know, we have to take a bit of a neutral stance, certainly in the primaries, and let those play out. So it's a little trickier at the party level, but it's really easy at Indivisible, and we do it.
Right, right. Well, you know, it's interesting, like that's where that community conversations or deep canvassing comes in. You know,
Yes.
if you do that and do it well, then you make it easy. You prepare the terrain, you cultivate the soil for the candidates so that if they say something like, yes, I'm going to raise the minimum wage, and the Chamber of Commerce goes ape crazy, they're not worried. They know they've got constituents that have their back. But so that's where
right.
I think those things go hand in hand.
I agree.
Do you know if there's anyone lining up to challenge Senator Greg Schmedes in District 19?
You know, there is. We had a candidate make his debut 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
2 weeks ago. His name is Bill Scott. He came and you know, made his debut. He's going to be working really hard to get that district. He's got a great campaign manager, and we'll have to get behind him and see where that goes, because it doesn't matter. I almost feel like any Democrat, even if they're not super progressive, if anybody's going to be better than Greg Schmedes, he's a lunatic.
Yeah, as I said, I worked for Claudia Reisner's campaign. She was the last Democrat who ran in Senate District 19. And I couldn't think of an overqualified, better candidate for that district was Claudia. And still, there's a challenge there. And so I'm definitely thrilled to get behind the new candidate that is going to challenge Great Communities, because no matter what, somebody needs to run against him. And we will do all of our support and efforts to make sure that he has a winnable campaign and the volunteers that he needs. But it's a challenge.
It's a tough one.
It is a really tough district, and I absolutely love the people in the district. I enjoyed canvassing and talking to people. But there are some challenges. It's a rural community, and sometimes getting out there and talking to voters, you're walking half a mile to get to someone's doorstep. And then there's even more challenges. We don't want to intrude on anyone's private property. So there's some, hesitations and safety that needs to happen out in that district. But I believe it's a district that can be flipped, and we are up to the challenge, and it's going to happen.
Okay, great. Yeah, I know what you mean about the rural communities and canvassing, because I canvassed in Roswell for Sochi some years ago. And, you get to some of these gates and like pit bull and stuff like that, or signs that were pretty intimidating. And, these days, especially, I mean, it's just getting scarier and scarier walking up on to somebody's front door when they've got somebody's, when it doesn't look real welcoming. And, so
Yeah.
hats off to you, Tiffany, for doing that in the rural district. This is pretty much the last question. The climate situation seems to get more dire every day. How do you sustain hope? I ask almost every guest this question.
You want to go first?
Oh, no, I'm not. I was going to say,
Yeah, all right. Yeah, it's very tough. I'm a long view strategy person, looking out 3-5 years. That's the way my head operates. That's the way my organizing skills operate. Figure out your long-term plan, break it down into pieces, bring it back to your short-term plan. And I have to say, I'm struggling more and more to come up with the long-term plan. The hope that I sustain and the way I get through the day is looking for every small win I can find, every tiny little, every conversation with the legislature that's hopeful, that goes in the win column. And I'm counting those more than I am looking long term, because I agree it's more dire every day, and I can't do this work without having hope something's going to change, even if it's a small increment.
And so I cross the river every day, twice a day to work. And so last summer, when the river was dry, it was a moment coming to work that brought me sadness, and a moment coming home to work that brought additional sadness. And this is not my idea, but there is a wonderful woman who's been talking to me about how do we address water issues in New Mexico. Water is life, and water is rare. And I feel that one thing that we can do, on top of the legislation that we can pass and big legislation that we can pass, we also need to have a cabinet position for water.
Yes.
And all things water. We are in state compacts over water with Texas, Arizona, and Utah, Colorado. I don't understand why in New Mexico, where we understand and respect water, why this isn't a cabinet level position that deserves the attention that it needs today.
I agree. It's interesting. I mentioned that I was up in Taos and had dinner with Jay Levine. We also had Robert Jensen there. And I've interviewed him twice in the last 2 months. And he has taken the position that it's time to recognize that we're not going to stop this. It's just going to hit us. And the best thing we can do is find ways in which people can, he doesn't use the word being resilient, adapt. In other words, and create.
That's right.
His idea is that people need to buy land that's arable and organize groups of people, almost like small communes or kibbutzim or something like that, where you share values, and you share the cost, and you share that you get the tools, and you build a resilient community, and get ready for survival. And I told him that makes perfect sense, except that there's only like the 1% and 2% of people in the world, in the United States, let alone the world, who have the capacity to do that. And so you're just bailing on all these other people. And so in conversation, we started talking about, and there was a bill in the legislature this last session that was about creating regional or community water planning. And I wondered if there wasn't a place for having a bill where you create climate resilience plans locally, and the state funds it so that, because then everyone can start planning on a local level. So for instance, if you start having a heat emergency in Gallup, there are plans for that, and there are ways in which people can go to cooling stations. They know where they are, things like that. And I wonder if you've thought about stuff like that.
Well, I know, I think there was a climate resiliency bill early on in this last legislative session that would have set aside some funds to study that and do just that. Of course, it didn't make it out of committee one. So it went nowhere, as did so many other good things. Yeah, it's I know, from me and my family, my children live here in town, we talk about this kind of thing all the time. And, do we need, there's honest and frank discussions. Do we need to leave the US? Do we need to, what do we want to do? It's something my husband thought about quite a bit. It makes me feel a little weird to think about being a prepper, but we kind of have to be a prepper, and we have to start thinking about this really, really strategically, and, at least for our own families, because I feel pretty certain that our city and state organizations aren't equipped to think about it.
And I'll say, I'm going to stay here in New Mexico.
Me too.
This is our home, and New Mexico has just a huge place in my heart. But there are things that we can do. We look at our acequias, and we need to overhaul infrastructure. We're losing almost 40% of our water is evaporated based on the infrastructure of the acequias.
Yeah.
So there are some things that we can do to combat climate change, conserve water. We can even do more than finding cooling stations for places for people to cool off, because people are going to be in much more dire need. Even where I live in the International District, the heat index is slightly higher than other parts of the city of Albuquerque. So we definitely need to start looking at what kind of vegetation we have growing. How do we plant the right kind of vegetation? And, there's some just micro level things that can be done. And then we need to look where Rayellen saying the big plan of what's going to happen in 20 years and where we're going to be at. And does it worry me every day? It does. And do I feel that we are not moving fast enough? Absolutely not. And I do agree with the fact that it's coming, and we do need to start thinking about ways to adapt, because I think we're past the point of stopping it. Now we need to just start managing of how we're going to adapt to this and do as many preventive measures that we can to control what is in our ability.
I sort of feel like if our government isn't going to do anything to prevent this, the least they can do is help us protect ourselves and give us the resources to help ourselves do that. Okay.
Yeah, I find it interesting that our current kind of modus operandi is let the tornado hit and then spend a lot of federal money to clean it up and rebuild, instead of preparing communities for a tornado to hit. And, if we, made communities resilient, cinder block buildings, things that don't get torn up so fast in tornadoes, you just do some thinking and planning. We've got the science, we've got the know-how. we'd save money in the long run by doing that instead of rebuilding from scratch the exact same thing that was there before, which is just going to get torn down again. So, you know, to your point, we're not planning, and it's difficult to get people to focus on that.
And we need to support regulators. We need more regulators that are enforceable, and you know, because that's the only way it's going to happen, to hold big business accountable, corporations who have been having their way and continue to have their way over the people.
Right. Well, I want to thank both of you for being with us today. And it's been an interesting discussion, not exactly entirely uplifting, but that the two of you and that us are still trying is like something to be, you know, optimistic about. Not to end on a downer note, but I don't know if either of you have read The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler.
I've been told about that book. I have not read it yet. I've had a couple people mention that I need to be reading that book.
It's a brilliant book, but it's pretty scary. It really lays out what it could look like when the government collapses because they can't afford to do anything because of climate change. And when, you know, it's just basically, you know, all kinds of gangs and, you know, militants roaming the streets and raping and pillaging, and this core group of survivors who managed to pull off developing a community. But it's a scary thing because I don't have a military instinct in my body. And the thought of me having a gun to protect my community is just, you know, not in my genes. And so I'd have to be one of the people who talks about it, but doesn't do any of that stuff. It's just not my nature. But it's a very good book.
They make some movies about that.
I think there are some movies about that.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yes. On that uplifting note.
Yeah. Well, all right, listeners, we've done enough to make you sad. But do keep in mind that there are people at Indivisible, Albuquerque, and at Retake Our Democracy who are in there pitching, doing everything we can to either mitigate climate change or prepare for it. And it's not just focused. One of the things I really like about Indivisible, one of the things I really like about Retake is we're not one issue. It's not just climate.
Right.
It's not just taxes. You know, you've got the Voices for Children out there that do a tremendous job on taxes and child policy, mostly child funding policy. But, you know, we borrow and steal from them. I'm sure you do too. But so I really appreciate the work that you do. And I think our listeners should be uplifted a little bit, or maybe a lot of it, that there are people out there who are trying to do the work. And we would encourage you to engage with Indivisible and Retake to help us with that. It's a gratifying thing to know you're in the trenches.
Exactly. And I just want to, last word for me, I just want to thank Retake for being an ally. I mean, working with the sweet slate of allies is really important to the work that we all do. And we're really grateful for everything Retake does. We're going to miss you for a few months. But we're anxious to step in wherever we can step in to help, and certainly look forward to Rethink Our Democracy.
Okay.
Yes,
thank you very much for being with us today.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.